Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Shiur is Leiluy Nishmat Daniella Shaina, Oleho Hashalom. Bas Yehoshua Falik Sheyichye, her neshama should have an aliyah, the Aliyidin Ayashia. In exactly a week from tonight, we will be celebrating Purim with Hashem's help. We will read the Megillah Esther. This year, Purim, of course, is Friday, and we will fulfill all the mitzvahs on Friday of Purim. It creates an interesting shaila about what to do with regard to the Sudas Purim, but that is not for now. For tonight, we will discuss some of the insights of the Gemara, of the Midrash, in the story of the Megillah and the happenings around there, and try, of course, with Hashem's help, to take some lessons from it in our life, in the Purim that we celebrate today, and the lives that we live here. If you have a Megillah in front of you, we're going to be studying a little bit tonight from Perek Hey, from the 5th chapter in the middle of the Megillah. The Megillah has 10 chapters. This is right in the middle. At this point, in the beginning of Perek Hey, the Torah tells us that the Jews are in terrible trouble. Haman, the ruthless anti-Semite, has succeeded in talking Khashvarish, who was also a ruthless anti-Semite, into sentencing all the Jews, Rahman al-Islam, to death, minar v'ad zaken, in the words of the Megillah, from old to young, taf v'noshim, women and children, b'yoim echad, upon the decree of Haman. On one day, we're all going to be massacred. This day was scheduled for the 13th day of Adar. Esther, the wife of Khashvarish, is Jewish. However, Khashvarish himself, amazingly, does not know that. Nobody in Khashvarish, nobody in the king's court is aware of that. The Jews, the Jewish people, are aware of that, but even her own husband, Khashvarish, doesn't know. Mordechai prevails upon Esther to go before the king, to reveal to the king that she is in fact Jewish, and that by sentencing the Jewish people to death, the king had in effect sentenced his own wife's entire family, community, and nation to extermination. Esther in the beginning is resistant. She says, this is not a good idea. If I go before the king without an invitation, I risk the death sentence. I risk the death penalty. And then of what value can I be? Mordechai tells Esther in no uncertain terms, this is your destiny. This is why Hashem put you here. The Jewish people are all counting on you. And this is your moment. And this is your moment. Vayehi b'yom hashlishi, says the Megillah in the beginning of Perek Hey. It was on the third day because Esther, after she finally agreed, insisted that all the Jews fast for 3 days on her behalf, that her mission be successful. And so they do, including Mordechai. They fast for 3 days. And it was on the third day, the Torah says, Vatilbash Esther Malchus. Esther gets dressed in royal garments. And she stands in the internal chamber of the royal palace, right opposite where the king lived. The king is sitting on his royal throne. And the king can see Esther, the queen, his wife, whom he hadn't seen for 30 days, standing there in the courtyard. And she finds favor in the king's eyes. He stretches out his golden scepter, and Esther approaches, and she touches the scepter. The extension of the scepter is the king's acceptance of the fact that Esther has come to see him without an invitation. Pasuk Gimel, Vayomer lo hamelech, and the king says to her, Maloch Esther Hamalka, what would you like, Esther the queen? Uma bakoshaseich, and what is it that you wish? What is it that you desire? What is it that you ask for? Ad chatzi hamalchus, you can ask me for up to half the kingdom. V'yinosen loch, and it will be given to you. Talk about an unexpected turn of events. Esther was expecting to be greeted with a death sentence. Esther was expecting to be greeted with being killed. Instead, the tefillas apparently of the Jewish people tear through the heavens. The prayers are accepted. Esther is welcomed into the palace by the king. He stretches out his golden scepter. She touches it. The king says, you can almost feel the romance in the words. The king says to her, Esther Hamalka, he calls her, Queen Esther. You've clearly come to ask me for something. You've clearly risked your life to make a request. What is it? Tell me what it is, and I will give you up to half the kingdom. Posuk Daled Vatoimer Esther, and Esther says, Imal hamelech toiv, if it suits the king. If it's good by the king, Yovoi hamelech v'homon hayoim, let the king and Haman come today. El hamishte asher asisi loy, to a banquet, to a feast that I have prepared for him. Okay. Of course, you all know the story. The king and Haman, after receiving this invitation, show up to Esther's banquet. And once again at the banquet, the king repeats his request and he says to Esther, tell me, my dear wife Esther, what is it that you want? You can ask me for up to half the kingdom and you will get it. And Esther says, come back tomorrow for another party. At the second party, again, for the third time, the king repeats his request. Esther, he says to her, you're driving me crazy. I mean, I like the food and I like the drink, but you're driving me nuts, really. For God's sake, tell me, what in heaven's name is it that you want? You can have up to half the kingdom. And it's only at the second feast that Esther reveals to the king that she is Jewish, and Haman, who has sentenced the Jews to death, is trying to exterminate her entire family and community. And it is at that point that Khashvarish sentences Haman to death. Okay. But the Talmud, the Gemara, is incredibly perturbed. There's a very disturbing part to the story. The Talmud says, it seems strange. Esther's reaction seems strange. When the king greeted her, when the king stretched out his royal golden scepter, when the king said to her, Esther Hamalka, Queen Esther, ask me for whatever you want. Make any request. You can even ask me for half the kingdom. Apparently, they didn't have a very good prenup. Khashvarish was ready to give Esther half of his kingdom. All she had to do was ask. For some reason, Esther refuses at that point to tell Khashvarish what she wants. And instead, she invites Khashvarish and Haman to a party. And even at the party, she still doesn't tell him what she wants and makes them come to a second party. And the Talmud asks, why? Seems so strange. I mean, for God's sake, Khashvarish is happy to see you. He's welcomed you, and he's offering you half the kingdom. Esther could have taken that moment and said, you know something, my dear king? I don't want half the kingdom. I don't even want a quarter of the kingdom. I don't even want a tenth of the kingdom. I don't even want 1% of the kingdom. Just the Jewish people, save them. It seems Khashvarish would have had no qualms with giving her exactly what she wanted. I mean, if he's prepared to give her half the kingdom, for crying out loud, half the kingdom, surely he would have been prepared to salvage one nation from the entire world. No, Esther doesn't. She says, you know something? I risked my life and I came here to invite you and Haman to a party. And what could be so exciting about this party? And when they sit at the party, another party. And at the second party, Esther says, oh, Haman is trying to kill me. Okay, so if Haman's trying to kill you, why didn't you tell me that yesterday? Why the need? Even after the whole story is over, we still don't really understand the need for two parties. What did they contribute? Why could Esther not have told Khashvarish what she wanted from the beginning? This question is discussed by the Talmud in Masechta Megillah at great length. The Talmud gives many answers. The Talmud says the answer that I gave last week, was that Esther didn't want the Jews to rely on her. She didn't want the Jews to say, Esther's in the palace, she'll take care of us. She didn't want the Jews to stop davening. The Gemara says Esther was concerned because Khashvarish was a vacillating kind of guy. He went back and forth very easily. So she says, we need to make sure, when I tell him what's going on, and that Haman is trying to kill me, we need to make sure Haman is right there so we can straight away put him to death. All right, the Gemara gives different explanations. But then the Gemara says, you know what's going on, says the Gemara. Esther didn't know when she laid out this claim, when she laid out this request for Khashvarish, she didn't know how Khashvarish was going to react. Even though Khashvarish said you can have half the kingdom, perhaps she wasn't sure if he was sincere. So Esther decided she's going to stage something. She invites the king to come to a meal together with Haman. Says the Gemara, why? She wanted to mess with Achashverish's head. She wanted Achashvarish to sit there at the meal and think to himself, Rabbeinu Shalom, what's going on here? My wife, Esther, invites me to a meal, to a romantic evening and a romantic dinner. And she invites Haman to join us as well? What's Haman doing here? Esther was trying to create some kind of a rift between Achashvarish and Haman. Esther was trying to get Khashvarish to be jealous of the attention that Esther was paying Haman. In the words of the Gemara, Esther was hoping that Khashvarish would think that Esther is being unfaithful to him, Khashvarish, with Haman. Esther wanted Khashvarish to think that she was being unfaithful and she was cheating on him with Haman. And that's why she invited Haman to the meal together with Khashvarish, to make Khashvarish jealous. How did she think that was going to work? How is that going to help? Well, if that's the case, says the Gemara, if Khashvarish in a fit of rage, perhaps will kill Haman and Esther together. And Esther said, I'm prepared to lose my life so that Haman will die and the Jews will be saved. This was one of the reasons why Esther did what she did. She wanted Khashvarish to think that something was going on between her and Haman. Did the plan work? Not entirely. What happened, the Gemara says, is that night, Khashvarish was lying in bed, apparently not a very intelligent man, or not a very suspicious man, or not a man very sure of his own assumptions and understanding. He's lying in bed and he's trying to figure out what's going on. Why is Esther inviting Haman to the party? And that, says the Gemara, is the reason why he couldn't sleep. The Torah, the Pasuk itself doesn't tell us, Leiluy, that night the king couldn't sleep. The Megillah doesn't say why. But the Gemara tells us why. The Gemara tells us why, because Khashvarish couldn't figure out why is Esther inviting Haman to the party. Says Khashvarish, are Esther and Haman plotting to kill me? My wife and my closest advisor, are they plotting to overthrow me? And if yes, are they working alone? And if no, are other people in on the conspiracy? And if other people are in on the conspiracy, why is nobody telling me? Perhaps, says Khashvarish, the reason why nobody is telling me is because the last time somebody saved my life, I didn't reward them. So he calls over his book of Chronicles and he tells the people, read me the story about what happened last time somebody tried to save my life. Somebody saved my life. And they tell him, yes, well, Mordechai saved your life last time. How did I reward him, says Khashvarish. How did I thank him? Well, you didn't give him anything. Says Mordechai, says Khashvarish. Now I know why nobody's warning me that that my wife Esther and my trusted advisor Haman are trying to kill me. Because the last time somebody saved my life, I didn't reward them at all. So Khashvarish immediately sets into plan a motion to reward Mordechai for saving his life the last time Bigsan and Seresh tried to kill him. Okay, that's according to the Gemara. That's the chronological sequence of events. Khashvarish can't figure out what's going on between Haman and Esther. He thinks they're plotting to kill him. He figures if he rewards Mordechai for saving his life last time, somebody, a trusted person, will save his life this time. And this is why he immediately sets into motion a plan to have Mordechai paraded around the streets, rewarded for saving the life of the king. Okay. At the following meal, when Khashvarish asks Esther for the third time what it is that she wants, Esther says she wants her life to be saved, and Khashvarish kills Haman. He's not suspicious. Khashvarish apparently is not suspicious that anything is going on between Esther and Haman. He kills Haman, he leaves Esther alone, and the plot of the story of the Megillah turns, and the Jews' fate begins to rise once again. But for that moment, Esther was prepared to die, if that's what it took, for the sake of saving her people, for the sake of saving the Jews. She was prepared to die under false pretenses. She was prepared to be put to death under false pretenses by Khashvarish for a crime she didn't commit, if that's what it would have taken for her to take Haman down. She didn't know what it would take to take Haman down. She was prepared to go down in order to kill Haman as well. Okay. In the end, it's important that we understand this. In the end, even the death of Haman and the death of his sons is not sufficient to save the Jewish people. Even after Haman is dead, the Megillah makes it clear the Jewish people's lives were still in danger. However, at that point, the stature of the Jewish people began to rise. Khashvarish realized what kind of a person Haman was. He realized that his truth, that Mordechai and Esther were truly faithful to him, and so he empowers them to issue an additional decree in which it is stated that the Jewish people have the rights to defend themselves. Once the Jews have the rights to defend themselves, then they set into motion a defense. On the 13th day of Adar, the day which was planned for the Jewish people's extermination, Rahman al-Islam, the Jews rise up, they're victorious over their enemies, the story is over, the Jewish people win, everybody celebrates a Yom Tov of Purim for all future generations, and everybody goes home. And here's the point. Everybody goes home, everybody celebrates, except for two people, Mordechai and Esther. Esther remains married to this anti-Semite, Khashvarish, this unpredictable human being who can be swayed at any moment. Esther remains his wife. Everybody else, all the other Jews, go home to make Kiddush and Havdalah. Esther lives in the palace of the king, not knowing what tomorrow will bring. This man doesn't have a hard time putting his wives to death if he doesn't like the way they follow or don't follow his instructions. And Mordechai, the leader of the Jews, also, it says, till his dying day, remains in the king's court, the viceroy of Khashvarish. He's there to keep a watchful eye on this man and protect him. In other words, Mordechai and Esther gave their lives for the Jewish people. Esther was actually prepared to die. She risked her life on more than one occasion. Going to the king was risking her life. Inviting Haman to a party was risking her life. She did it at least twice, even 3 times. No problem. She had no issues with it. She was happy to go and be there for the Jewish people. And even Mordechai himself, the Megillah says, even Mordechai himself also remained Mishnah Lamelech HaChashverish, remained the viceroy for the king of Egypt so that he could be there and protect the Jews. Mordechai and Esther, the heroes of the story of the Megillah, remained there till the end in order to be there for the Jews. What was the reward? What kind of thank you did the Jewish people get? Did the Jewish people give Mordechai and Esther for what they had done? How did the Jewish people thank them? So we all know at the end of the Megillah, the Torah says that when it was all over, Mordechai HaYehudi was Rotzoi L'Roiv Echav. Most of his brothers liked him. Most of his brothers appreciated what he had done. Most, of course, the Gemara says, but not all. Some of the members of the Sanhedrin disassociated themselves with Mordechai. They said rabbis shouldn't hold these types of political positions. They said rabbis shouldn't be involved in politics. They said Mordechai and Esther should go home. Mordechai shouldn't be involved in the affairs of the secular government. Esther shouldn't be married to a shiksa goy. Go home. You've saved the Jewish people. The experience is over. It's time for you to go. And Mordechai and Esther, this is the story the Torah tells us. Mordechai and Esther, the hero who saved the Jews, literally saved the lives of the Jews, at the expense, in Esther's case, literally, of risking her own physical life. The thank you that they got from the Jewish people was that the Jewish people didn't fully approve, didn't 100% approve of how it is that they handled it. And in the last Rashi in the entire Megillah, the Torah tells us some of the members of the Sanhedrin they disassociated themselves from him. They said to Mordechai, it's enough. You saved the Jews. It's time to leave the palace of the king and to go back to the Sanhedrin where you belong. Why did Mordechai and Esther do that? Why did Mordechai and Esther remain so close to the king? Why did they remain so closely associated with him? Apparently, Mordechai and Esther felt that the danger wasn't over, that the danger hadn't passed. Apparently, Mordechai and Esther felt that even though Haman was dead, and even though his sons were dead, and even though the Jews had been given time by the king, permission and time to go after their enemies and to vanquish them and to destroy them, apparently Mordechai and Esther knew that a Khashvarish cannot be trusted. And at any given moment, another anti-Semite can come, unnochamol einreden, and again convince the king to get rid of the Jews, and the whole story could start all over again. And so Mordechai and Esther said, we're taking no chances. We're staying right here. And if anything happens, we're going to be the first ones to get there and to be there on time. And they would once again be prepared to risk their own lives for the sake of the Jews. You know the opening line of the Megillah. How does the whole thing start? It says, "Vayehi b'mei Khashvarish," that it was in the days of Khashvarish. Hu Khashvarish hamoilach b'hoyde vad Kush. He was the Khashvarish who ruled from Hoyde till Kush. The simple meaning of the pasuk is that the term Achashverosh, not unlike the term Pharaoh, or not unlike the term Caesar, or many other of these terms, were terms that applied to many different kings. Many kings carried these names. So when the Torah says it was in the days of Achashverosh, the Torah says, I'll tell you which Achashverosh I'm talking about. The Achashverosh who ruled from Hoyde vad Kush. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says, Achashverosh hu Achashverosh. Why does the Torah say he was Achashvarish? To tell you that he was the same evil man. He was the same anti-Semite before the story of Purim, during the story of Purim, and after the story of Purim. Mordechai and Esther understood that. Apparently, the rest of the Jews did not. And so while everybody else was celebrating, and while everybody else felt safe, and while everybody else went home and celebrated Purim for many years to come, the two loyal, faithful servants of the Jews, Mordechai and Esther, had no relief. They had to stand there on guard and watch Achashverosh and see who came in and who came out, and which royal decrees were signed and which weren't signed, and to know exactly what was going on. They anticipated another flare-up at any moment. Baruch Hashem, it wasn't to be, at least not in that generation, but they knew that it was coming. Mordechai and Esther understood they could not let their guard down, not even for a moment. Eventually, the Jews did rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. According to many opinions, it was Esther, it was the child of Esther and Achashverosh, or the grandchild, the following king, that actually gave the Jews finally permission to go back and rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Khashvarish refused. Their child, from one of the children of Esther and Khashvarish came a king who did eventually allow the Jews to go back and rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash, and once again experience 400 plus years of the Jews being in their land. But until that moment came, Esther and Mordechai were there standing guard, ready to throw their lives away if necessary, in order to be there for the sake of the Jews. What's the Torah trying to tell us with this story? It's not just a story about the Jews being in danger and them being saved. That happened many times. It's not just a story about a miraculous victory. It's not just a story about Hashgacha Pratis, about divine providence. It's not just a story about how amazingly many different things come together, and Punk, the wife of the king, is a Jewish woman. It's not just about that. It's also a story about Jewish leadership. It's about decisions that leaders have to make. People who are in position, the leaders of the Jewish people, Mordechai, in this case, Mordechai and Esther, who have to make decisions about things they have to take care of, that the rest of the Jewish people don't understand. It's about the risks that they have to take, the danger that these people have to put themselves in order to have the Jewish people's back, in order to protect them, something they need to live with on a daily basis, while all the other Jews are running around and screaming, "Happy Purim!" There's two Jews in the court of Khashvarish, anticipating with their eyes open wide to see when the next Haman will come around, or when the next decree of Khashvarish will come forward. The Jewish people don't always respect it. The Jewish people don't always understand it. You would think, after Mordechai and Esther literally saved their lives, you would think the Jewish people would give them a standing ovation and say, "We trust your judgment. Whatever you think is best, that's what you should do." Oh no. Oh no. They had lots to say. In fact, we learn this every year when we study the story of the Megillah. Not only did the Jewish people disapprove of what Mordechai did after the miracle was over, not only did they disapprove of Mordechai remaining the viceroy, remaining the Mishnah Lamelech, remaining the second in command, in place of Haman, Mordechai took Haman's place. Mordechai took Haman's position. Not only did the Jewish people disapprove of that, but the Jewish people blamed the whole thing on Mordechai. They said it was all Mordechai's fault. You know why? Because Mordechai refused to bow down to Haman. Mordechai refused to bow down to Haman, and that's what made Haman angry. And that's why Haman decided to annihilate the Jewish people. They said to Mordechai, "Nobody asked you. You don't want to bow down to Haman? Go somewhere, go into the yeshiva, sit down in the base medrash and study Torah. Don't bother anybody and nobody will bother you." No. Instead, Mordechai has to sit there in the courtyard wherever Haman walks by and refuse to bow down, angering Haman. And they told Mordechai was informed. They said, "Your refusal to bow down to Haman is angering him." The Jews came to Mordechai and begged him, and they said, "Please, stop antagonizing Haman." The Torah tells us the lineage of Mordechai. Mordechai, the Megillah says, was the son of Yair, the descendant of Shimi, the descendant of Kish. Each one of these names, Ben Yair, Ben Shimi, Ben Kish, has tremendous significance. But for now, who was Shimi? Who was Ben Yair? Mordechai Ben Yair Ben Shimi. Who was Shimi? Shimi was a man called Shimi ben Gera. Who was Shimi ben Gera? Shimi ben Gera was a man who cursed David HaMelech, threw stones at David HaMelech, rebuked David HaMelech for some of the sins he had done. Because of Shimi ben Gera's actions toward David HaMelech, Shimi ben Gera deserved capital punishment. For whatever reason, David HaMelech refused to kill Shimi, at least not immediately. Later on, he asked his son Shlomo HaMelech to take care of it. But at the time, David HaMelech refused to lay a finger on him. You know what the Gemara says? Oh, and Mordechai was a descendant of Shimi. You know what the Gemara says? When the story of Purim happened, and Haman and Khashvarish sentenced the Jewish people to death, you know what the Jewish people said? They said, all of this is David HaMelech's fault. They blamed David. Because if David would have done what he was supposed to do and killed Shimi, Mordechai would have never been born. And if Mordechai would have never been born, nobody would have antagonized Haman. You see, all the other Jews were bowing down to Haman. Everybody else was either bowing down or getting out of the way. Mordechai is the only stubborn one who refused. The Jews said, if David would have killed Shimi ben Gera a couple of generations ago, we would never have to deal with this. Mordechai would have never been born. Haman would have never been antagonized. He would walk around thinking the whole world bows down to him, and he would leave the Jews alone. No, they came to Mordechai and said, you have to poke the bear. They were resentful to Mordechai. Who knows? Perhaps they said, if nobody had ever bowed down to Haman, if nobody had ever refused, to bow down to Haman, maybe Haman would have left the Jews alone. There's a very famous Midrash that says, Mordechai didn't just refuse to bow down, but Mordechai would pick up his foot every time Haman walked past him. Why did he do that? Because Mordechai and Haman had a history together. This goes back for decades. You see, the Medrash tells us Mordechai and Haman were both generals in an army that was fighting a war. Haman had his platoon of soldiers, Mordechai had his platoon of soldiers. And Haman and his men ran out of provisions, they ran out of food. Decades before the story of Purim. And Mordechai didn't. And Haman came running to Mordechai and said, please, I need food. Otherwise my men are going to die. We need provisions. And Mordechai said, I won't give it to you, but I'll sell it to you. For what? Sell yourself to me as a slave, said Mordechai to Haman. And Haman did. He scratched his finger and wrote it with his own blood at the bottom of Mordechai's shoe. I, Haman, the descendant of Agag, the king of Amalek, sell myself to you, Mordechai, as a slave in exchange for the provisions that you'll give me for my men. Signed, Haman ben Amdasa. And every time Haman walked by, Mordechai would pick up his shoe and remind Haman that he was Mordechai's slave. You want me to bow down to you? A master doesn't bow down to his own slave, Mordechai would say. And the Jews begged Mordechai, please stop. Leave the guy alone. He's delusional. He's in charge. He's very powerful. Don't mess with a man when he's powerful. He's a short temper. Mordechai refused. Mordechai understood that Haman and Khashvarish were bloodthirsty anti-Semites, and the Jews were going to have to face them sooner or later. Mordechai understood there was nothing to be earned by sticking your head in the sand and pretending like the danger isn't coming. Mordechai understood that the Jews needed to face this, and they needed to face this head on. Mordechai understood that there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The danger didn't come from Mordechai. The danger came from Haman and Khashvarish of that generation. Mordechai and Esther understood that. And they alone were there to defend the Jews in a way that the Jews needed to be defended. Most of this was lost on the Jews of the time. They didn't understand. They didn't get it. Why is Esther inviting King Khashvarish to a feast? Why is Esther inviting Khashvarish and Haman to a feast? If Esther hasn't been summoned to the king for 30 days, why is she going voluntarily? And if she's going voluntarily, why is she going more than once voluntarily? Do what you got to do and be gone. The Jews almost gave up on Mordechai and Esther helping them. They said, we better just daven to Hashem. We don't know what's going on with these people. Their actions were never truly and completely understood by the Jewish people. And that really, in a sense, is one of the lessons of the story of the Megillah. The Torah tells us Mordechai and Esther represented what Jewish defenders are all about. They knew the defense, they knew the danger that the Jews had to deal with. They knew the nature of what it is that was going on behind the scenes. And they were there to defend the Jews in ways that the Jews didn't understand till years later, till centuries later, till decades later. You know, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, why is the last thing the Megillah tells us that some of the Jews didn't like Mordechai? You know why? Why is that the last thing the Megillah says? You know what he said? He said, there's one kind of a person that everybody likes. Nobody has any issues with. Everybody has only wonderful things to say about this person. You know who that is? A person who does nothing. A person who does nothing, stands for nothing, takes no stand, makes no statements, has no backbone. Nobody has anything bad to say about them. Doesn't bother anybody. But the moment you stand up and say, I'm a defender of the Jews, the moment you stand up and say, Haman is a bloodthirsty anti-Semite, and we better take him down, otherwise he's descendant of Amalek, otherwise he's going to destroy us. The moment you send Esther into the lion's den, the moment Esther is prepared to risk her life for the sake of the Jewish people, the moment anybody does that, you're always going to have a critic. There's always going to be somebody who goes, I don't think you should have done it this way. I think you could have done it that way. We should be appreciative for saving us from Haman. He was the one who incited Haman in the first place. Besides, now that it's all over, he should go and sit and learn Torah and mind his own business. You'll always find a critic when you do something, always somebody who said, he should have done it differently. He could have done it differently, this and that, and why. The sign that you're doing something right, the sign that you're doing something to save the Jewish people, the sign that you're active and that you're alive, is that somebody is there to criticize. A teacher of mine once said, a stopped watch is right twice a day. A stopped watch is right twice a day. A watch that works is very often never right. It's always a couple of seconds off or a second off. So why does everybody want a watch that works? What's the answer? Because a watch that stopped is not a watch. It's not a watch. Of course it's right twice a day. If you do nothing, you may be right twice a day. If you do something, everybody will have something to say to you. You could have and you should have and you don't know why. There'll always be critics if you're active. There'll always be critics if you take a stand. Even if you take a stand that saves the lives of the Jews, and even if you do so at the expense of your own life, there'll always be critics. Mordechai and Esther understood the definition of Jewish leadership is to save the Jews and is to be there, to take down the Hamans and the Khashvarishes and to produce from them a leader who would once again allow the Jews to return and rebuild the second base of Mikdash, to take the Geula, to take the redemption right out of the jaws of the anti-Semite Khashvarish, and to give the Jews a brighter future, to teach them that their real security comes only from Hashem. And the Gemara concludes by saying, for this reason, it is obligatory upon every single Jew to make a special achaim, to drink wine on Purim. Why? We want to, says the Gemara says, we want to celebrate the meals that Esther threw for a